The following compilation features unsettling and spine-chilling tales sourced from Reddit's horror communities. Reader discretion is strongly advised. These narratives may contain graphic descriptions, psychological distress, and themes that could unsettle sensitive individuals. Proceed with caution, as immersion into these eerie stories may provoke fear, unease, and sleep disturbances. Enter this realm of Reddit's creepy horror stories at your own risk, as the line between reality and the macabre may blur within these chilling narratives. The salt-laden wind whipped through the narrow streets of Blackwater Cove, carrying with it the ever-present stench of rotting fish and something far more insidious. I pulled my worn jacket tighter around my shoulders, quickening my pace as I made my way down to the docks. The early morning fog clung to the weathered buildings, obscuring the upper floors and giving the impression that the town simply faded away into nothingness. I've lived in this godforsaken place my entire life, watching as it slowly decayed like a beached whale left to the elements. Blackwater Cove was once a thriving fishing village, but now it's little more than a collection of dilapidated houses and empty storefronts. The fish that once filled our nets have long since disappeared, replaced by other things. As I rounded the corner onto Wharf Street, I nearly collided with Old Man Thaddeus. His roomy eyes widened in surprise, then narrowed with suspicion. "Watch where you're going, Ezra," he growled, his voice like gravel in a cement mixer. "Ain't safe to be wandering about, especially not with the tide coming in." I nodded, trying to sidestep him, but his gnarled hand shot out and gripped my arm with surprising strength. "You'd do well to remember what happened to your pie," he hissed, leaning in close enough that I could smell the tobacco on his breath. "Some things are best left forgotten." With that cryptic warning, he shambled off, leaving me standing there with a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air. I shook off the encounter and continued toward the docks, my steps echoing hollowly on the old wooden planks. The fishing boats bobbed listlessly in the grey water, their paint peeling and their decks empty. No one goes out anymore, not since the incident. It's been 3 years since that day, but the memory of it still haunts my dreams. I made my way to the end of the pier, where my own small boat was moored, the Molly's Revenge, named after my mother, who disappeared when I was just a boy. As I untied the ropes and prepared to cast off, I felt the familiar weight of eyes upon me. Glancing back toward the shore, I saw a group of townspeople gathered at the edge of the dock. Their faces were a mixture of concern, fear, and something else. Hunger, perhaps, or was it envy? "Ezra," a voice called out. It was Octavia, the librarian's daughter, her red hair a stark contrast to the drab surroundings. "Please, don't go out there. You know what happens when the fog rolls in." I waved her off, trying to ignore the plea in her voice. "I'll be fine. Octavia, someone has to bring in food, or we'll all starve." As I pushed off from the dock, I heard muttering from the assembled crowd. Words like fool and cursed drifted across the water, but I paid them no mind. They didn't understand. They couldn't understand. The fog thickened as I navigated through the channel, the familiar landmarks of the coast disappearing one by one until I was surrounded by a blank, grey void. The only sound was the gentle lapping of waves against the hull and the distant, mournful cry of a foghorn. I checked my watch, 8:17 a.m. The tide would be turning soon, and with it would come the changes. I had to work quickly. Cutting the engine, I let the boat drift as I prepared my nets. The old techniques didn't work anymore, not since the waters had become tainted. Now, we had to use different bait, different methods that would have horrified our ancestors. From a locked cooler beneath the deck, I retrieved a small, cloth-wrapped bundle. My hands trembled slightly as I unwrapped it, revealing a chunk of meat, dark and glistening. I tried not to think about where it came from, or the muffled screams I'd heard coming from the old cannery last night. With practiced movements, I attached the bait to a specially designed hook and lowered it into the water. Then, I waited. Minutes ticked by, each one feeling like an eternity. The fog pressed in around me, so thick now that I could barely see the bow of my own boat. And then I felt it, a subtle change in the air, a shift in the very fabric of reality. The water began to roil and bubble, as if boiling from beneath. A foul stench rose up, making my eyes water and my stomach churn, and then breaking the surface with a sound like tearing flesh. It appeared. I'd seen it before. Of course, we all had. But no matter how many times I witnessed it, the sight never failed to fill me with a primal, existential dread. It was massive, easily dwarfing my boat. Its skin, if you could call it that, was a sickly, bioluminescent green that pulsed with an inner light. Countless tentacles, each as thick as a man's torso, writhed and twisted in the air. But it was the eyes, oh God, the eyes that truly captured the horror of the thing. Hundreds of them, ranging in size from a pinhead to a dinner plate, covered its amorphous body, and every single one was fixed on me. I forced myself to breathe, to focus on the task at hand. This was why I came out here. After all, this was the price we paid for our continued existence. With shaking hands, I reached for the harpoon gun mounted on the side of the boat. The harpoon itself was no ordinary weapon. Its tip was fashioned from a strange, iridescent metal that had washed up on our shores in the wake of the first appearance. It was the only thing we'd found that could pierce the creature's hide. As I took aim, a tendril shot out of the water, wrapping around the boat's railing. Another followed, and another. The creature was pulling itself closer, its massive bulk displacing so much water that waves threatened to capsize my small vessel. I fired the harpoon, the recoil nearly knocking me off my feet. There was a sound like shattering glass, and then a shriek that seemed to come from everywhere at once. It was a sound of pain, yes, but also of rage and hunger. The harpoon had found its mark, burying itself deep in what passed for the thing's flesh. Ichor, black as night and thick as tar, oozed from the wound. But instead of retreating, the creature pressed its attack. Tentacles lashed out, slamming against the boat and sending spray everywhere. I stumbled, nearly falling overboard, and in that moment of distraction, a smaller tendril wrapped around my ankle. The touch burned like acid, and I screamed in agony as I was lifted into the air, dangling upside down. I found myself face to face with the nightmare-made flesh. Its countless eyes blinked in unison, and I swear I saw something like recognition in their depths. And then it spoke. Not with words, not exactly, but somehow its thoughts invaded my mind, bypassing my ears entirely. The voice was ancient, vast, and utterly alien. Ezra, it said, and hearing my name in that inhuman tone nearly drove me mad on the spot. You have come again, as your father did. As his father did. I thrashed wildly, trying to break free, but the creature's grip was implacable. What do you want? I managed to gasp out. Washington NT. The thing seemed almost amused. I Washington NT nothing. I am. And because I am, you are. Without me, your kind would have perished long ago. Memories flashed through my mind, memories that weren't my own. I saw Blackwater Cove as it once was. Centuries ago, I saw the first encounter between my ancestors and this entity. I saw the pact that was made, the price that was paid. The curse, I whispered, understanding dawning like a brutal sunrise. It's not a curse at all, is it? It's a bargain. Astute, little on Earth East. Yes, a bargain. My presence keeps the Washington Ters rich. The storm's at bay. In exchange, I require sustenance. The implications of that last word hit me like a physical blow. The disappearances over the years, the strange meat we used as bait, the sounds from the cannery. It all made horrifying sense. But why? I asked, my voice cracking. Why us? Why here? The creature's thoughts pressed against my mind once more, and I got the distinct impression of amusement. Why does the tide me in? Why do the stars wheel overhead? I am, and so it must be. With that, The tentacle around my ankle loosened, dropping me unceremoniously back onto the deck of my boat. I lay there, gasping and shaking, as the entity began to sink back beneath the waves. "Remember our bargain, Ezra," it said, its voice fading. "The Northeast XT offering is due soon. Do not disappoint me." And then it was gone, leaving nothing but churning water and the lingering stench of its presence. The fog began to dissipate, revealing the coastline of Blackwater Cove in the distance. As I started the engine and pointed the boat toward home, my mind raced. What was I going to tell the others? How could we continue living like this, knowing the true nature of our curse? But deep down, I knew the answer. We would go on as we always had. We would make the offerings, keep the bargain, and pray that the cosmic horror lurking beneath our waves remained satisfied. Because the alternative, the entity's hunger unleashed upon the world, was too terrible to contemplate. As I approached the dock, I saw the crowd had grown. They were waiting for me, their faces a mix of relief and trepidation. Octavia was at the forefront, her green eyes wide with concern. "Ezra," she called out as I tied up the boat. "Are you all right? Did you see it?" I nodded, unable to meet her gaze. "I saw it," I said quietly, "and I learned things." A hush fell over the assembled townspeople. They knew, on some level, what our ancestors had done, but knowing and understanding are two very different things. Thaddeus pushed his way to the front, his craggy face set in grim lines. "Well, boy, out with it. What did the Deep One tell you?" I took a deep breath, steeling myself. "It's not a curse," I began, my voice gaining strength as I spoke. "It's a bargain, a pact made long ago, to keep our town safe and prosperous. But the price..." I trailed off, unable to voice the horrible truth. But I didn't need to. Understanding dawned on their faces, followed quickly by horror, denial, and finally, resignation. Octavia reached out, taking my hand in hers. "What do we do now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I looked out over the crowd, seeing the fear in their eyes, the weight of generations of secrecy and sacrifice, and I made a decision. "We do what we've always done," I said, my voice carrying across the suddenly silent docks. "We survive, we endure, and we pray that our bargain holds." As the crowd began to disperse, murmuring amongst themselves, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The entity beneath the waves had revealed itself to me in a way it never had before. Why now? What had changed? And more importantly, what would it ask of us next? As I walked back into town, the weight of knowledge heavy on my shoulders, I couldn't help but feel that Blackwater Cove was standing on the precipice of something vast and terrible. The old bargain was shifting, evolving, and I feared that we might not be prepared for what was to come. But for now, life would go on. The fog would roll in, the tide would turn, and the Deep One would hunger. And we, the people of Blackwater Cove, would continue our ancient dance with forces beyond our comprehension, praying that our steps never falter. For in this cosmic ballet, a single misstep could mean the end of everything we know. As night fell over Blackwater Cove, an uneasy silence settled upon the town. The revelations of the day had shaken everyone to their core, and I could feel the weight of unasked questions hanging in the air like the ever-present fog. I found myself wandering the empty streets, unable to face the confines of my small apartment. The rhythmic crash of waves against the shore provided a constant backdrop to my tumultuous thoughts. As I passed by the old town hall, a flicker of light from within caught my eye. Approaching cautiously, I peered through one of the grimy windows. Inside, I could make out a gathering of the town's elders: Thaddeus, Mayor Cordelia Blackwood, Dr. Elias Marsh, and a few others I recognized but couldn't name. Their faces were grave as they huddled around a table strewn with ancient-looking documents. A hand on my shoulder nearly made me jump out of my skin. I whirled around to find Octavia standing there, her eyes wide with concern. "Ezra," she whispered, "what are you doing out here?" I gestured toward the window. Something's going on. The elders are meeting. Octavia's brow furrowed. After what you told us today, I'm not surprised. But why all the secrecy? Before I could respond, the town hall door creaked open. Mayor Blackwood's weathered face appeared in the gap, her steel-grey hair gleaming in the lamplight. "Ezra, Octavia," she said, her voice carrying a hint of resignation. "I suppose you'd better come in. There are things you need to know." Exchanging a nervous glance, Octavia and I followed the mayor into the musty interior of the town hall. The other elders looked up as we entered, their expressions a mix of wariness and something that looked unsettlingly like pity. "Sit down, both of you," Thaddeus growled, gesturing to a pair of empty chairs. As we took our seats, "Doctor," Marsh cleared his throat. "Ezra, what you experienced today, it's not unprecedented. Every few generations, the entity reveals more of itself to one of us, usually to a member of your family line." I felt a chill run down my spine. "My father." Mayor Blackwood nodded solemnly. "And your grandfather before him. The Winthrop family has long been favored, if that's the right word, by the creature beneath the waves." "But why?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "What makes us special?" The elders exchanged uneasy glances before Thaddeus spoke up. "It goes back to the founding of Blackwater Cove. Your ancestor, Jeremiah Winthrop, was the one who first made contact with the entity. He struck the original bargain." Octavia leaned forward, her face pale in the flickering lamplight. What exactly was this bargain? What did Jeremiah promise? "Doctor," Marsh sighed heavily, "protection for the town, bountiful fish in our waters, and safety from the storms that plague this coast. In exchange," he trailed off, unable to continue. "In exchange for sacrifices," I finished, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. Mayor Blackwood nodded grimly. "At first, it was fish and livestock, but as the years passed, the entity's appetite changed, grew. The implications hung in the air, unspoken but understood by all. I thought of the disappearances over the years, the strange meat we used as bait, the sounds from the old cannery. My stomach churned. "But why tell us this now?" Octavia asked, her voice shaking slightly. "Why break generations of secrecy?" Thaddeus leaned forward, his rheumy eyes fixed on me. "Because the bargain is changing. Boy, you felt it today, didn't you? The entity is evolving. Its hunger is growing." I nodded slowly, remembering the alien presence that had invaded my mind. It said the next offering is due soon, but it felt different this time, more urgent. Mayor Blackwood stood, pacing the length of the room. "We've managed to keep the worst of it contained for generations, limiting the sacrifices to those who wouldn't be missed. Drifters, the occasional tourist, but I fear that soon, that won't be enough." A heavy silence fell over the room as the implications of her words sank in. Finally, Octavia spoke up, her voice barely above a whisper. "So what do we do?" "Doctor," Marsh spread his hands in a gesture of helplessness. "We don't know. The old methods, the rituals passed down through the generations, they may not be enough anymore. We need to find a new way to appease the entity. Or what?" I demanded, a spark of anger cutting through my fear. "We let it destroy the town, unleash it on the world." Thaddeus slammed his gnarled fist on the table. "Of course not, boy, but we're running out of options, and time." Mayor Blackwood turned to face us, her expression grave. "That's why we've decided to bring you two into our confidence. Ezra, as a Winthrop, you have a connection to the entity that none of us can fully understand. And Octavia, your family's knowledge of the old ways, the forgotten lore, it may be our only hope of finding a solution." I felt the weight of responsibility settle on my shoulders like a physical burden. Beside me, Octavia sat up straighter, a determined glint in her eye. "Where do we start?" she asked. "Doctor," Marsh gestured to the pile of documents on the table. "These are all the records we have of past encounters, rituals, and offerings. Some date back to the town's founding. We need to go through them. Look for any clues or patterns that might help us understand what's changing and how to adapt. As we began to sift through the yellowed papers and crumbling ledgers, a sense of urgency filled the room. Outside, the fog thickened, and the distant cry of the foghorn seemed to take on a mournful, almost plaintive tone. We worked through the night, poring over accounts of past sacrifices, deciphering cryptic notes left by long-dead town elders, and trying to piece together a coherent picture of the entity's nature and desires. As the first light of dawn began to filter through the grimy windows, I sat at a back, rubbing my tired eyes. "There's something here," I muttered, more to myself than the others. "Some pattern we're not seeing." Octavia looked up from the tome she was studying, her red hair disheveled from hours of work. "What do you mean?" I shook my head, frustrated. "I don't know. It's just a feeling, like we're missing some crucial piece of information." Mayor Blackwood, who had been dancing in a corner, stirred at my words. "Perhaps," she said slowly, "it's time we visited the old lighthouse." The others in the room stiffened at her words. Thaddeus opened his mouth as if to protest, but a sharp look from the mayor silenced him. "The lighthouse?" I asked, confused. "What's so special about it?" "Doctor," Marsh cleared his throat nervously. "The old lighthouse has been abandoned for decades. It's said to be, well, cursed, even more so than the rest of the town." Octavia's eyes widened in realization. "The keeper's logs. Of course, the lighthouse keeper would have had a unique vantage point, both literally and figuratively." Mayor Blackwood nodded grimly. "Exactly. If there are answers to be found, they may well be hidden in those logs. But I warn you, the lighthouse is not a place to be taken lightly. There's a reason we've kept it off limits all these years." As I looked around the room at the faces of the town elders, I could see a mixture of fear and resignation in their eyes. Whatever secrets the lighthouse held, they were clearly terrified of what we might uncover. But we were out of options. With the entity's hunger growing and the old bargain failing, we needed answers. And if those answers lay within the crumbling walls of the abandoned lighthouse, then that's where we had to go. "When do we leave?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "As soon as the tide turns," Mayor Blackwood replied, her voice heavy with the weight of unspoken fears. "May God have mercy on your souls." As we began to gather supplies for our journey to the lighthouse, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were about to uncover something that would change Blackwater Cove forever. Whether for better or worse remained to be seen. The fog outside seemed to thicken, as if in response to our plans, and in the distance, I swore I could hear something massive stirring beneath the waves. Our time was running out, and the secrets of the lighthouse beckoned. Little did we know that the horrors we had faced so far were merely a prelude to the cosmic terrors that awaited us in the abandoned tower by the sea. As we approached the dilapidated lighthouse, the fog seemed to part before us, as if granting us passage. The ancient structure loomed above, its paint long since weathered away, leaving behind a skeletal frame that creaked and groaned in the salty breeze. Octavia and I exchanged a nervous glance before pushing open the rusted door. The interior was a mess of cobwebs and decay, but our eyes were drawn to a heavy iron trapdoor in the floor, secured with a padlock that looked far too new. "This wasn't here before," Mayor Blackwood muttered, producing a key from her pocket. "We had it installed years ago, to keep people out, and perhaps to keep something in." The lock clicked open, and we descended into the darkness below. The beam of our flashlights revealed a circular room, its walls covered in strange, undulating symbols that seemed to shift and writhe in the flickering light. In the center stood a pedestal, upon which rested a leather-bound book, the keeper's log. As I reached for it, a chill ran down my spine, and I heard a faint whisper, as if the very air around us was alive with secrets. We spent hours poring over the log, deciphering the increasingly manic scribblings of generations of lighthouse keepers. As we read, a terrifying picture began to emerge. The entity beneath the waves was no mere creature. but a fragment of something far vaster and more incomprehensible. It had been drawn to our reality by the cosmic alignments that occurred at the founding of Blackwater Cove, and the original bargain had bound it to this place. But that binding was weakening. With each passing year, each sacrifice, the entity grew stronger, more aware. It was not content to merely exist in our world. It wanted to fully manifest, to draw more of its unfathomable bulk into our reality. "This is why the bargain is changing," Octavia whispered, her face pale in the dim light. "It's preparing for something bigger." As if in response to her words, the ground beneath us began to tremble. From somewhere far below, we heard a sound that was part roar, part scream, and wholly alien. "It knows we're here," I said, my heart pounding. "It knows we've discovered the truth." Mayor Blackwood's face was grim as she turned to us. "Then we have no choice. We must complete the ritual described in these pages. It's the only way to reinforce the binding and push the entity back." The ritual was complex and horrifying, requiring blood from a Winthrop and words in a language that hurt to pronounce. As we prepared, I could feel the entity's rage building, the very air around us growing thick and oppressive. With trembling hands, I cut my palm, letting the blood drip onto the symbols etched into the floor. Octavia began to chant, her voice growing in strength as the words took on a life of their own. The room began to spin, reality itself seeming to warp and bend around us. I caught glimpses of impossible geometries, of vast, dark spaces between the stars. And through it all, I felt the entity's presence, ancient, vast, and utterly alien. For a moment that stretched into eternity, we teetered on the brink of oblivion. The entity raged against the bindings, its fury threatening to tear apart the very fabric of our world. But then, slowly, inexorably, I felt it begin to recede. The symbols on the walls flared with eldritch light, and I heard a sound like the universe itself groaning in protest. And then, suddenly, it was over. We collapsed to the floor, gasping for breath. The oppressive presence was gone, replaced by a stillness that felt almost holy in its intensity. Is it done?" Octavia asked, her voice hoarse. Mayor Blackwood nodded slowly, her eyes wide with a mixture of relief and residual terror. "For now, we've bought ourselves some time, reinforced the old bindings, but it's not over." I finished for her. "It'll never truly be over, will it?" She shook her head sadly. "No, Ezra, this is the burden we bear, the price we pay for our town's existence. We've pushed back the darkness for now, but it will always be there, waiting." As we emerged from the lighthouse, I was struck by how normal everything looked. The fog had lifted, and I could see fishing boats heading out to sea, their crews unaware of the cosmic horror we had just faced. In the days that followed, life in Blackwater Cove slowly returned to what passed for normal. The fish returned to our waters, and the oppressive atmosphere that had hung over the town began to lift. But for those of us who knew the truth, things would never be the same. We had glimpsed something beyond human comprehension, and that knowledge weighed heavily upon us. The entity was contained for now, but we knew it was still there, lurking beneath the waves, biding its time. As I stood on the docks one evening, watching the sun set over the ocean, Octavia joined me. She slipped her hand into mine, a gesture of comfort and shared understanding. "Do you think we'll ever be free of it?" she asked quietly. I sighed, looking out at the seemingly peaceful waters. "I don't know. Maybe someday we'll find a way to break the bargain for good. Or maybe this is just our lot in life, to stand guard against the darkness, to keep the rest of the world safe from what lies beneath." She nodded, leaning her head on my shoulder. "At least we're not alone in this anymore." As we stood there, I felt a complex mix of emotions wash over me. Relief at having averted disaster, pride in our small town's resilience, and a deep, abiding sense of responsibility. But underneath it all was a current of dread, a knowledge that our victory was temporary at best. The entity would return, its hunger renewed, and when it did, we would be here, ready to face it again. For that was the true curse of Blackwater Cove, not the bargain itself, but the burden of knowing what lurked just beyond the veil of our reality. As the last light faded from the sky, I squeezed Octavia's hand, drawing strength from her presence. Whatever came next, we would face it together. And for now, that was enough. The sea stretched out before us, calm and inscrutable, keeping its secrets hidden beneath the waves. And somewhere in its depths, something ancient and vast waited, dreaming of the day it would rise again. It's okay to leave the door unanswered. Really, it is. In fact, unless your visitor has a good reason to be there, and you have a good reason to talk to them, please don't open that door. I don't care if they know you're home. I don't care if they think you're a jerk. Do not open that door without first knowing the exact outcome. The salesman drove that lesson into me a few days ago. I'm sorry, I said as I flipped through the pages of our half-full photo album in the living room. The album was my husband's idea. You should have seen how excited he was about it. And he insisted on us finishing it before this day, our first anniversary. Though I saw it as the anniversary of his death, a death that I had caused. I miss you, I whispered, while fiddling with my ring and starting to cry again for the 5th time since I woke up. I know you'd want me to move on and stop blaming myself. I've tried. Really, I have. But I can't do it. I can't. I just wish I could see you one more time. My wallowing was interrupted by the doorbell ringing. Seriously, I thought to myself. A few seconds passed, and then it rang again. I was tempted to ignore it, but my unwanted guest would have seen me already. Why did I leave the stupid blinds open? The doorbell rang for a 3rd time. Yeah, I'm coming, I grumbled. Let's get this over with already. I wiped the tears from my eyes and took a few deep breaths while I shuffled over to the door. Probably a neighbor, one of the more annoying ones, apparently. I cursed under my breath. It's Sarah again, isn't it? Why won't she leave me alone? I thought as I peered through the peephole. It wasn't Sarah. It wasn't one of the neighbors at all, actually. That should have been my cue to leave the door closed and walk away. If I didn't even know the person, what was the benefit of talking to them here? Still, something in me wanted to open the door. Maybe it was the feeling that my visitor wasn't the type to give up. Maybe it was plain curiosity. Maybe it was something else. Whatever it was, it coaxed me into opening the door and taking in the figure in front of me. Now, I don't know jack about modern fashion. My husband and I had that in common, but I doubt that the man I saw would have fit in it. He would have been perfect as a film noir detective, though. He wore a black leather fedora and brown trench coat, a grey double-breasted jacket with a red tie and white dress shirt underneath, and a pair of black slacks. He was also wearing leather gloves, and to top it all off, he was smoking a cigarette. It was a cohesive look, except for one thing, the aviator sunglasses. Again, I'm no fashion expert, but one of those things was not like the others. He cleared his throat, snapping me out of my stupor. Miss Dawson? Yes, he asked in a gravelly, formal-sounding voice. I nodded as he stuck his right hand out. Should I have lied? Oh well, too late now. Pleasure to meet you. Likewise, I said and shook his hand. He held my hand for several seconds too long before letting it go. He didn't offer his name. After standing in silence for what felt like an eternity, I decided to be the one who would clear my throat this time. And, what's your name? Oh, right. Of course. How rude of me. You see, the problem is that, well, I don't quite have one. Huh. What's with this guy? Everyone simply calls me the salesman. I let a groan slip out. The novelty of seeing a man a few decades out of place had worn off quicker than I expected. Of course, today of all days, I get stuck with a solicitor, and an extra quirky one at that. Hooray for me! How fun. Okay, well, I'm not interested in buying anything, and I've got some important stuff to take care of. Have a nice day, I said, still partially trying to mask my frustration as I began pushing the door closed. He laughed, scoffed even, and jammed his foot in front of the door. You're really pushing it, buddy. Please don't lie to me. My eyes narrowed. Excuse me, I said. Please don't lie to me. My pool of patience, which was minuscule enough to begin with, was starting to run dry. And what exactly am I lying about? He removed his foot from the door. You claimed you have important things to do, but that's a lie, isn't it? All you've been doing is looking through an incomplete photo album. You've been doing that almost all day, as a matter of fact. You were spying on me. That should have been my cue to cut the interaction off, but I didn't. Something that I can't explain compelled me to keep talking to him. In a way, yes. However, I prefer to think of it as waiting for the right moment. Oh, this'll be good. I should have just closed the door, but being pissed off felt more comfortable than being sad. All right, fine. The right moment for what? The salesman appeared, taken aback. To make you an offer, of course. I'd like to make your wish come true. I laughed at him. Seriously, do you realize how corny that sounds? Trust me, I'm very serious. All right, whatever, I'll take the bait. And what wish is that? A smile that was both malevolent and caring crossed his face. I just wish I could see you one more time. The casual yet mildly perturbed demeanor I had been trying to uphold slipped. What did you say? I asked in a more desperate tone than I would have liked. I just wish I could see you one more time. That's it, isn't it? Your wish. How did he hear me? Did he read my lips from outside? Was it just a lucky guess? Anyone who knows me could guess my wish. But he repeated my exact wording, didn't he? All right. Forget appearances. What's your problem? Huh? Why are you screwing with me? I can assure you I'm not, as you say, screwing with you. I'm here because I have a specific solution to your specific problem. This guy's off his meds. And what problem is that exactly? I yelled. His gaze fixated on my ring. Well, the problem of your late husband. I believe we're both aware that you won't be moving on from that hit and run for quite some time. Well, the problem of your late husband. I believe we're both aware that you won't be moving on from that hit and run for quite some time. My blood went from hot to boiling. He nodded towards my left hand. When's the last time you took that band off? Still beating yourself up over him having to push you out of the way? Now, if you'd just be willing to... I slammed the door in his face. I slammed it so hard I thought I might launch it through the frame. I muttered something about the man that would horrify my parents. There was something wrong with the salesman. Really wrong. Even ignoring the fact that he knew my wish, plus the exact wording I used, it felt like he truly knew me. I locked the door and looked out the window, praying he'd be gone. He was. That's the last of that. Then, I knew it wouldn't be dark for another 2 or 3 hours, but thanks to the combination of my earlier tear-driven bout, plus the whole salesman interaction, I decided to call it a night. After brushing my teeth, I headed to my room and closed the door. Geez, what a day, I said, heading over to my dresser to set out my clothes for tomorrow. What a day indeed, a familiar voice echoed. I spun around to face the intruder, the salesman. How did he get in here, and why didn't I hear anything? Sorry, miss. I took the liberty of letting myself in. I glanced towards the bedroom door. Still closed. You could hear that creaky thing if it opened so much as an inch. So how? It was like he spawned directly into my room. Following my gaze, he said, "Please don't waste your time trying to figure it out. It's not worth explaining." He was right. This wasn't the time to worry about it. Besides, I could give it some more thought after chasing him out of the house with a few broken ribs and a cracked skull. He appeared unarmed, but I wouldn't let that hold me back from taking a good swing or two with the bat waiting at the foot of my bed. It was standing against the leg on my side, so he couldn't see it from his position. I had another one beside the front door. Not that it would do me much good here. Plus, Dual-wielding bats seemed scarily inefficient. I would have preferred to call the police, but I didn't know if he had a gun or knife on him. Charging him and landing a swing or two seemed like a safer option than reaching for my cell phone. Plus, he was blocking the only exit, so there wasn't anywhere to run while I waited for the cops to show up. Okay, keep him talking an inch towards the bed. Act like I'm just sitting down, then rush him. Again, apologies for the intrusion. I couldn't help but feel like our earlier conversation was cut short. You never did give me an answer on my offer. Okay, I'll humor him. Anything to keep him distracted. Yeah, sorry about that. You kind of pissed me off is all. He shrugged. Okay, I know your offer. So what do you want in return? My soul or something? I said as I rolled my eyes and added a chuckle for effect. He laughed. Of course not. Don't be ridiculous. All I want is a keepsake. Fair enough, I guess. What kind of keepsake? I asked while I meandered toward my bed. It's nothing to worry about. I'm sure you won't protest. That depends on the item, doesn't it? I might have a bit of a problem with your choice. He nodded in agreement. I suppose so, though that's not what I meant. What did you mean? Then, I closed my hand around the bat. I was sure the metal would feel great against his skull. He sighed. He sounded disappointed, like a teacher finding out her favorite student plagiarized the final essay of the class. Please don't. Don't what? I needed a moment or two of distraction. A weapon could still be lurking under his coat. Granted, he probably would have pulled it out by now. But you never know. The bat, the hand-me-down Eastern one you used in Little League, that is what you're holding, isn't it? My eyes widened. How'd you know? I could have feigned ignorance, but something told me it was more than a lucky guess. That's irrelevant. All you need to know is that it's a waste of time. You won't attack me. Yeah, sure thing. Buddy. My grip tightened around the bat and I charged around the bedpost. I aimed a swing at his side with as much force as I could muster. There. A hit. The blow to his head came next. At least, it should have. But it didn't. I didn't take the first swing, and I didn't make it around the bedpost. I didn't make it a single step. He hadn't shot me. He hadn't done anything to me. I just couldn't bring myself to attack. I stared at my legs. What's happening? Move, I told. No, screamed. At myself. Nothing happened. Not so much as a twitch in the right direction. Confused. I locked eyes with him again. His glasses were gone. His eyes, something was wrong with them. It took a bit to pinpoint, but I eventually realized they looked animalistic. Yeah, that was it. In the slots where his human eyes should be. I gazed into the flame-orange eyes of an animal. That was the best description I could come up with. Wondering what the deal is? I nodded. Here's the deal. Helen, what happened to that formality he seemed so intent on preserving? I won't waste your time explaining the mechanics of the whole being unable to move thing. Heck, I don't understand it myself yet. All I know is that you can't attack me. He was right. No matter how hard I tried, I physically could not make a move towards him. All right. Then, let's get on with it. He began removing his glove, the one on his left hand this time. There's someone else I'm hoping to meet tonight, so I need to get moving. I doubt he'll be interested in opening his door after dark. His glove was fully off now, so he reached his hand in my direction. There was something off about it, though it was much more egregious than the problem with the eyes. The hand looked like he had put it in a furnace, counted to 30, then put it back in and counted to 50. Patches of black hair were growing over it haphazardly, almost like he had started surgically attaching it only to stop halfway through the process. Despite the burns, the skin was not only present but thick and paw-like. So your wish. You wanted to see your husband again, didn't you? Have a chance to apologize, make things right. Personally, I think it's a pretty laughable thing to blame yourself for, but whatever, let's get on with it. I shuffled towards him with a will that wasn't my own, leaving the bat behind. The hand was all my body seemed to care about. Shake his hand. That single command is what my body followed. My mind was free to run wild, though. What are you doing? Stop. Get a grip. Will you? It was pointless. No matter what I shouted, I could not prevent myself from advancing. After what felt like more than an eternity but less than a nanosecond, I reached handshaking distance. I looked, or rather, my body forced me to look up at him. That sinister smile from earlier is back, but there wasn't even a semblance of kindness in it this time. Your wish in exchange for a keepsake. Consider it a deal. He grabbed my hand and gave it a firm shake. I started to lose consciousness. The last thing I thought before I blacked out was that I never should have opened that door. My eyes shot open and my body rocketed into a sitting position, sweat pouring down my head and falling onto my bed. I thought of last night. I thought of the salesman. A dream. I considered it. No, there's no way. That was way too real. I've had chronic nightmares for years, and they are always wild and scary adventures with little to no basis in reality. This was different, not a dream. Still, a flicker of doubt remained, doubt that was eradicated a moment later. Something feels wrong, I realized. I looked down at the source of my confusion, my left hand. My ring was gone, but before I could reflect on that, someone rang the doorbell. Your wish in exchange for a keepsake. Wasn't that what the salesman had said? Despite my internal protests, my mind and body filled with hope. Hope that sidestepped the walking red flag known as the salesman. I sprang from my bed and rushed to the door. Let it be him. Please let it be him, I pleaded. I bolted down the hallway and reached the door quicker than any Olympic runner ever could. I threw it open. I was standing face to face with my husband. Hi, Helen. The previous day's crying bouts couldn't even compare to this one. He tried to say something else, but I threw my arms around him before the words could leave his mouth. It's you. It's really you, Andy, I bawled. I hugged him tighter and said the words I needed him to hear. Thank you. Thank you for saving me. Okay. He laughed while returning the embrace. It wasn't a big deal. Don't worry about it. But if I'd just been paying more attention... Hey, it's fine. I mean it. No, if I'd just... He shut me up with a kiss. I didn't truly realize how much I missed moments like that until now. It felt natural. It felt wonderful. It felt wrong. Something was wrong. His lips, they tasted like death. I pulled back from him, breaking his hold around me. Wait. Helen, what's wrong? I considered brushing the whole thing off and making up an excuse for it. That was when I noticed his face. It was different from when I opened the door. His right eye had clouded over, and a dark mark of decay had taken over his left cheek. Andy, I say, my voice beginning to tremble. It's my breath, isn't it? I knew I should have checked it before knocking. I barely registered his comment. Andy, what's happening? What's happening? The mark on his cheek was spreading. It had taken over the left side of his face and was encroaching on the right, and his hair. It had gone from dark brown to light grey. What do you mean? Helen, are you feeling okay? This can't be happening. Stop. Stop it. Stop it, I screamed as I pulled him back into me. I don't know who I was begging. Maybe it was God. Maybe it was the salesman. Maybe it was no one. Honey, you're scaring me. Now his voice had started decaying too. It was getting more hoarse by the second. What's wrong? I felt the cold touch of his bony fingers on my cheek. You can tell me. You know I'm always here for you. We promised to do that for each other, right? He pushed me away from him with enough force to send me stumbling backward. You do remember that promise, don't you, Helen? His voice was a forceful whisper at best. His hair had mostly fallen out, and his clothes were sagging, the body beneath them withering away faster and faster. He took a step backward, then another, and then another. Why did he push me away? Why wouldn't he hold on to me? I rushed to him and held him in my arms, ignoring his appearance and his attempts to pull away from me. This was still my husband after all, wasn't it? Please, don't go. This time, I was begging Andy himself. Yeah, as if this man who was nothing but decaying skin and bones had any more control over the situation than I did. "I'm here, Andy. It's okay. I'm here." My tears soaked the back of his shirt. "Helen," he croaked. "Yes," I questioned while doing my best to avoid a complete breakdown for his sake. "This..." I had to bring my ear to his mouth to hear him at all. "This is all your fault." "What?" I said, "It's your fault." I pulled my head away and locked eyes with him. "No, don't say that. Please, please don't say that." "It's true." He puts more effort into his failing vocal cords to ensure I can still hear him. "I didn't freeze up." "You did. You're the reason I'm dead." I didn't know what to say. What could I say? His breath whistled out of his shrinking lungs. He was struggling to breathe. "No, that wasn't it. You never should have opened that door." He laughed. His laugh got louder and louder, even after his body shouldn't have been able to produce any noise at all. And maybe I was hearing things, but at that moment, his laugh sounded just like the salesman's. I live a pretty miserable life. No aspirations, no goals, no hobbies, no real connections with people. It sucks, but at least I have the insight to admit that it's all my fault. My passion died when I turned 14, and everything since then has been distractions to fuel my dopamine-addled brain until I die. Even writing this now is a struggle. I'm having to use literary muscles I thought had atrophied completely. I wouldn't be writing this at all if I didn't need help. Badly. I don't think anything else besides posting my story here would be able to help me. God knows doctors can't. It all started a few months back when I learned about the concept of lucid dreaming, controlling your dreams through realizing you're in a dream. It seemed like the perfect tool to make my miserable life a little better, provide some escapism through sleeping. So I started looking up how-tos to DIY my own nocturnal reality. One of the big methods other lucid dreamers encourage is reality checking, setting a timer so every few waking hours you check to make sure you aren't dreaming. These checks usually involve touching a mirror, pinching yourself, trying to remember how you got where you are, or checking if the people around you are behaving normally. The whole idea behind it is that if you start checking your reality while being awake, you'll start checking your reality while you're asleep. So I set a timer, and every 2 hours I did a reality check. I touched the walls, looked at my hands, or tried to hold my breath. I also started logging these in my phone. It felt silly having to denote every 2 hours, but it seemed a small price to pay for unlimited freedom for 8 hours each night. I was just beginning to doubt the value of my efforts when I had a lucid dream for the first time. It started within my old elementary school, stuck within the front desk in the class, alone except for my ex-girlfriend. It felt hazy, foggy, like the room was trapped in a cloud. Swaying back and forth as if sea-bound, my desk was covered in exam papers for an exam I hadn't studied for. "Michael, you haven't even started your exam and there's only 10 minutes left of class." I didn't know we were going to have an exam. "Angela," my voice wavered, swaying almost in time with the room. Angela shook her head, moving closer to me now, her skin porcelain, hair like straw that brushed against her shoulders, her eyes pearlescent, fingernails tipped in faded blue polish. She was stunning, just as I remembered her last. Her hand came up and ruffled my hair. "You never really try, do you, Michelle?" She made her way out of the classroom, smiling, swaying through the rows of desks, almost waltzing with the sway of the room. I wanted to call her back. I wanted to draw her close, but I found my mouth glued shut, and my body now glued to its seat. I despaired. I was losing her again. And then my phone's alarm went off. I checked my surroundings. Classrooms are real. I might not usually be in one, but it could happen. I couldn't pinch myself. My arms and legs were thoroughly stuck. Then I tried reading the writing on the whiteboard. In cursive scrawlings was written, "Good morning." But when I tried to read the word letter by letter, I couldn't. The meaning of the writing was there, but the actual writing was nonsense. Gibberish. My brain trying to fill in the gaps while the language center of my brain was sleeping. I was dreaming, In hindsight, that made a lot more sense considering I hadn't taken an exam in 10 years, and my ex would certainly not be around to administer it to me. I stood, willing the facade of the classroom to fade, leaving me on the shore of a beach, waves lapping at my feet. I called to Angela, summoning her back. She turned to me, the light of the sun cocooning her, her skin a prism reflecting the harsh rays, taming them like the soft glimmer of the moon. She smiled, something I had not seen for a long time. I ran my hands against her. I knew it was a dream. I knew it was fiction made from the firing of nerves in my sleeping brain, but I could have sworn I felt the skin of her arms against me like the fuzz of a peach. "What are you doing, Michael?" she whispered. Her dress fluttered around her, lapping against the wind. She tamed my stray hairs with her hand, running it against my neck, settling it to rest upon my shoulder. "I've missed you so much. You can't do this. It isn't right. I shouldn't be here. Just stay a little longer, for me. Just a little." She let me hold her to my chest, and the dream continued. We talked. We reminisced. She was everything I had remembered her to be. Kind, funny, smart. I wanted her to talk forever. My life could be a glorious eternity of sitting in rapture of her. But the sun set upon the dream beach, and she stood pulling away from me. "Our time's up again." It already was. "I'm happy I got to spend just a little bit more with you," she said. "No, I won't lose you again. You have to stay." I grabbed her. I hadn't meant to grab her hard, but she seemed to flinch in pain. She struggled, but I held on. She shouldn't have struggled. It was my dream. I was the master of it. It bent to my will. "You don't get to leave again. Ever," I shouted. The sun set upon the crashing waves of an imaginary ocean. I stood, grasping at the ghost of a girl long gone, a fragment I would trap within my psyche for an eternity I couldn't understand. The twilight colors of night began to set in, reflecting off her glossy eyes, wet with tears. "Please," she cried, desperate, begging. I awoke. I know it might sound strange after the half-success of my first lucid dream, but I became like an addict looking for another fix. I wanted to see her again. I had to. My days were consumed by a cycle. Every 2 waking hours was a reality check. A handful of melatonin gummies, cold medicine, and even Benadryl to get me to fall asleep. I began sleeping more and more, and the less I remained awake, the more drowsy my waking hours became. This might sound miserable. It was, but what else was there to do? My reality became neglected. Bugs gathered around dirty dishes that littered my apartment. Everything smelled of decay and rot. A miasma of apathy. A couple days after my first lucid dream, Angela appeared at my doorstep, slumped, unmoving. I had taken her inside. She hadn't said a word about the state of the apartment. I think her presence might have even worsened it. As crazy as it sounded, I figured I might have summoned her here, like my dreams had a sort of analog to the real world. I was happy that she was back. Even in the state she was in, it was a little less lonely with her there. I know this should have been the end. Angela was back, and I could patch up our relationship. But she was unresponsive, cold. I had tried talking to her, but she wouldn't respond. I guess it made a strange sort of sense that we could only connect through dreams. If my dreams were powerful enough to bring her here, they must be strong enough to make her better as well. Angela moved about the apartment sometimes, seemingly only when I wasn't looking. I was so focused on my dreaming efforts that I often didn't see her for days. I figured she must still be in the apartment though, as I would find little trinkets she would leave. Wet footprints across the bathroom, stray hairs on the furniture, doors open that I had left shut. It felt very much like having a pet cat silently roaming around. Despite not seeing her frequently, her appearance seemed to worsen each time I did see her. I should have been concerned, maybe taken her to the doctor. But I was stuck, ingrained into the idea that I could only help through my dreams, that if I could do it again, we would be like we always had. That first dream had been so picturesque it was easy to deny the reality of her. Things continued much the same, until weeks later, I had my second dream. I stood within a chapel, one from my youth. back when I still attended services every Sunday, the stained glass casting colored light through the pews. This was the church my parents had been married in. I remember the day, nearly tasting it on my tongue, the memory so strong, dissolving like cotton candy against my lips, memories embedded with youth and sunlight. I was sitting next to my family, their bodies stiff, an empty facsimile of the people I loved. They stared straight ahead at the pulpit, where she kneeled praying. My reality check was much quicker this time, with no need for a phone reminder. She was here, so I must be dreaming. I walked to her, her hands trapping a rosary, thumbing beads, eyes closed, lips moving in silently uttered prayers. I reached out to touch her. "You need to let me go." Her voice rang out through the church, echoing against its high ceilings. Her eyes still shut. "You know I can't do that," I muttered quietly into her hair. "You're going to make yourself sick. It isn't healthy. It hurts." Her body racked with quiet sobs. I stood back and took the sight of her in. Shrouded in a black robe, she looked at me with tear-laden eyes. Every section of her peeking out from under the robe was a mess of bruises, pooling in strange spots, speckling her skin like splatters of carmine-colored paint against a pale blue canvas. From her mouth trailed a line of fluid, also rust-colored, that spewed from her mouth incessantly, flying from it when she spoke. Her lungs rattled. Her eyes, the color of cataracts, seemed pushed back into her swollen skull. Delicately, she reached out a bloated arm, tears staining her cheeks crimson. "I'm sorry." "Oh God, Angela, I can fix it." I couldn't imagine the reason why my subconscious would depict her in such a way, in such torment, but I could fix it. I was the master of this realm, and I could just will her to be better, to be healthy, to be back to how she was the first time I dreamed her. It would be as easy as thinking it so. It wouldn't. Nothing I did made it better. I could will anything into existence, but I couldn't make her better. I tried. Ceaselessly I tried. As she begged to be released, I tried over and over again, and she wouldn't get better. She wouldn't heal. I felt useless as I watched her suffer. I begged and pleaded alongside her, staring up at my family in the pews, their hollow eyes only reflecting my pain back to me. "I can't move on until you let me go." Over and over she would scream, a pile of pieces, barely humanoid, laying on the floor. "I can fix it. I just need more practice. I promise. You don't have to leave. Please," she begged, more puddle than human, melting before me. I awoke. As horrible as it seems, I didn't stop trying to fix her through my dreams. Of course, I had to do some troubleshooting before making a real attempt again. Obviously, the abuse of over-the-counter medication had led to some weird side effects, but that could be fixed through their removal and course corrected through the reading of some lucid dreaming guides to avoid melted ex-girlfriends. I figured after a few weeks of getting my sleep schedule back to normal through eating healthier, cutting down on my screen time before bed, cleaning up a little around the apartment, limiting myself to 8 hours of sleep a night, and fixing my circadian rhythm, I'd be good to go for another attempt. Angela seemed to have left the apartment after that dream. I don't know if it had scared her away, if I had messed it up somehow. Her absence at least made it easier to clean up the apartment. When she was here, she was always leaving messes behind. I missed her, though. My days were now so much quieter, emptier with her gone again. It made me all the more desperate to get her back. When I laid down to sleep each night, begging myself to dream of her again, I could almost feel her with me, like she was encouraging me with her presence, cradling me as I fell asleep. It only took a handful of days for her to reappear in my dreams. I was on a dock. Across from me she stood, facing the waves. I was so excited I almost ran to her. She looked halfway normal again, until she turned to face me. Her eyes were squashed like old grapes, draped across her ashen cheeks, her skin now tight against her bones, almost like the head of a drum, breaking in places where it had given way to the tension. From her crawled forth all manner of creatures, boring holes into her body, their fat white flesh acting as a contrast to her blackened, sunken features. She dropped her robe, it rising into the breeze, revealing her stomach pregnant with her liquefied innards, skin transparent in the sun's light. She walked towards me, each step rocking the gallons of fluid contained in her body cavity. Finally, taking my face into her hands, she gazed at me with her unseeing eyes. I awoke, but the dream did not end. I lay in my bed, her hand still upon me. I screamed. I could feel my body stuck in place, glued still, as our faces grew closer and closer. From her eyes crawled beetles with radiant carapaces that mirrored the green her eyes used to be. Finally, our faces inches apart, she opened her mouth. What poured from her was tar-like, featuring bugs, teeth, chunks of flesh and still squirming rats. It coated my face, covering my eyes, my mouth, even dripping down into my ears. I thrashed, trying to claw her away, trying to get the substance off of me. I woke up, clawing at my face, screaming. I reality checked. Immediately, holding my breath for 30 seconds. Yes, this was real. I sighed and vomited onto my floor. The damage was mostly psychological. I had a few scratches on my cheeks from myself, initially freaking out upon waking up, still trying to get the gunk off of my face. I tried not to think of the way her hands had felt against me, leather-like. Kronieski. I called a psychologist. Obviously, I had not handled things as well as I had initially thought, if my subconscious was going to commit such levels of treason against me. The psychologist visits went well, talking about the sudden shock of the loss, how it can be hard to move on, and why my ex-girlfriend might be appearing as a sleep paralysis ghoul. The psychologist didn't even seem too shocked. It might be a more common phenomenon than I had initially thought. Armed with tools of self-forgiveness and mindfulness activities, I mentally felt better prepared for the next time. Physically, however, I couldn't fall asleep. The psychologist called it somnophobia, a fear of falling asleep, probably caused by my nightmares. Every time I went to lie in bed, I felt my heart race. I felt like I needed to flee now or risk death. My thoughts would race until they felt like pure static in my head. I tried deep breathing, exposure therapy, CBT, but I couldn't get more than a few hours of sleep a night and could only fall asleep if I passed out from exhaustion. I started moving through the world like a zombie, days blurring, everything feeling wrapped in cotton, dull, muted. At least I couldn't dream while sleeping for such short periods. At least I didn't have to see her again. Not until the sleep paralysis started. Lack of sleep and my now developing panic disorder both contributed to an increased risk of sleep paralysis. But even the doctors don't know why it happens every night. Every time I wake, I am glued still. Even my lungs aren't able to fully move, and I see her. Sometimes she is sitting at the foot of my bed, sometimes petting my hair. Sometimes she's hiding somewhere in my room watching me. Every time I see her, she looks worse. More pieces fall off of her. Sometimes she tries to talk. I think her vocal cords are long gone, but I still get the meaning even if I can't hear the words. She wants me to let her go, but I can't. I can still make things better. My sleep paralysis only lasts a few minutes, and then once again I am the master of my own limbs, and I am able to get out of bed and see that she is not really there. But sometimes I'm not so sure she is really truly gone. I think I can feel her sometimes. In the corner of my eye, in the closet tucked next to my shoes, just outside of the shower curtain while I wash my hair. I think I can sense her behind doors, just waiting for me to open them, or around corners just out of sight. She can only move in my dreams, and for the few minutes when I transition from sleeping to waking, but nonetheless, I can still sense her. Ever since my last dream, I've stopped reality checking. I've actively tried to prevent lucid dreaming, just to ensure I don't see her again in my dreams. But yesterday I was at the psychiatrist again discussing my progress since the last session, and I realized that I couldn't read the diploma on the wall. I could see it. I could make out the meaning, but the letters were just beyond my comprehension. I went to ask the doctor about this, ask if this was a symptom of the lack of sleep, and she was there instead. She just stared at me. She was so small, crumpled against herself. She reminded me of a mummy, hollowed out and dried, a husk. She sat there unmoving, as if she was unable to push herself to do so, even in my dream. I'm tired of this game, I told her. She nodded, her neck crinkling like dried paper. I don't think this is healthy for either of us, I said, and she nodded again. I'm sorry. I should have been there for you. I didn't try hard enough and now I'm just making it worse. She stood from the chair, slowly and with great effort, and hugged me. I awoke. I stood from my bed, taking in my apartment with fresh eyes. The bugs and rodents had worsened. Flies born from maggots born from flies. Generations created and died solely within the apartment. A large stain creeped out from under my bed. I had noticed it weeks ago, but I had been in denial of its source. The dark rust color of the stain could be from only one source, a source that was also perpetrating the bug problem. I kneeled beside the bed, leveling my head with the floor and gazed at Angela. She hadn't left. She had just been hiding. I tried to scoop her out as delicately as possible, making sure that she came in one piece without much of a fight. I slid her small form into a duffel bag, hauling in over my shoulder, loading it into my car. I drove down to the lake, our favorite spot, and I delicately laid her down on the wooden dock next to me, her body supine, as I dangled my feet into the water that had taken her so long ago. I have not been entirely honest, not with you, the reader, or with myself. Angela Withers died 3 months ago, drowning in the local lake due to exhaustion. I was with her. I had tried to save her, but I was just too late. I was too scared to call the paramedics. What would be the point? So I left her, and I went home. No one knew I had been out there with her. I told her parents she had dumped me and left with another man to a different state. I won't pretend to know the force that brought her back to me, but I know that it has to end. Sitting at the dock, for the first time in weeks, I basked in the sunlight, letting it infuse me with its warmth, feeling it radiate into my bones. I was no longer a creature of dreams, trapped in a spiral of loss. It was time to let go. I know it hasn't all been good, but I'm glad we got to spend a little bit more time together. I kissed her delicately on the remains of her forehead and tossed her remains into the lake. She had always been right. It was time for something new, to build new skills, gain new hobbies, make friends, call my parents, clean my apartment. That should have been the end of it. She was gone back, released, back where she really belonged. But my dreams haven't stopped. I still see her, but she's something else now. Her skin is new, made from patches of algae. Her teeth glitter like the scales of a fish. Her hair is strands of plants that dance in the water surrounding her. She is beautiful again, and she is not ready to let me go. Each night I dream of her beautiful watery form as she pulls me close to her, whispering to me of everything she has become. She tells me that she's there at the lake, waiting for me, that she has an eternity planned for us, and I listen. I feel as if I am in her dreams now. She dreams of the lake, of me, my body made out of the fauna of the lake just as hers. I'm imprisoned by these dreams. She holds me captive, mentally. I twist and writhe, but she is so much stronger than me now. Sometimes she dreams of me as I am with my flesh and bone, jumping into the lake. In these dreams she holds me as I drown, holds me as I rot, holds me as I turn into bones, and holds me as I finally is filled with new life through the lake. I have drowned dozens of times in her dreams. If the dreams were just dreams, then I wouldn't be writing this. But I no longer wake in my bed. She is pulling me towards her. I started waking in my front lawn, then down the street. Now I awaken in the forest. Every night having to walk further and further back home. It is exhausting. I don't think I have much time left until I find myself on that dock. Thank you for venturing into the darkness with us. If you dare to explore further, be sure to subscribe to our channel for more spine-tingling tales of horror and the supernatural. Remember, the shadows hold endless mysteries, waiting to be unveiled. Stay tuned for more bone-chilling stories as we continue to traverse the eerie depths of the unknown together. Until next time, may your dreams be free from the haunting echoes of our tales. Or perhaps not.